There is a particular kind of pressure that builds slowly and then arrives all at once. You see it in football sometimes, a team that looks composed, that appears to be managing a game, and then suddenly the anxiety that was always there becomes visible on every face. The composure breaks. The problems that were being managed become problems that are being exposed. That is not a bad description of where FIFA finds itself with the 2026 World Cup. Not broken, not canceled, not empty in any absolute sense, but under a kind of institutional pressure that has been accumulating for months and that has now arrived with enough force that the governing body can no longer simply absorb it with confident statements and promotional optimism. The tournament is underway, the football is being played, but something around the edges of it, in the hotels, in the resale markets, in the attorneys general offices of 2 American states, in the feedback from businesses across host cities, in the volume of tickets still showing as available days before matches kick off, tells a story that FIFA's public communications have struggled to contain. And it is a story worth telling carefully, because it touches on questions that go well beyond this particular tournament. Questions about who the World Cup is designed for, who it actually serves, and what happens when the gap between those two things becomes impossible to ignore. Start with the tickets, because the ticketing story for this World Cup is not a single episode. It is a series of decisions and consequences that have unfolded over months and that have produced, as things stand, a situation no governing body would have chosen. When prices were first announced, the reaction from supporters groups was immediate and sustained. Group stage tickets beginning at prices that placed them beyond the reach of the kind of supporter who has always been the atmosphere of a World Cup. Final tickets priced at levels that most people cannot even contemplate. A fan organization described it as a monumental betrayal of the tradition of the World Cup and said the current prices were extortionate. FIFA responded. A new pricing tier was introduced, $60 per ticket, available at every match, including the final. But the details of that concession told their own story. Those $60 tickets were to be allocated to national federations for their own supporters, and the number of them available, a minimum of 1,000 per match, is a tiny fraction of stadium capacity. In a venue holding 60 or 70,000 people, 1,000 discounted tickets is not a policy of inclusion. It is the appearance of one. The supporters group that had led the criticism said the announcement was nothing more than an appeasement tactic in response to global negative backlash. The language was pointed and deliberate. What followed in the weeks since then has been a ticketing market that has behaved in ways the governing body clearly did not anticipate. Resale prices for a number of group stage fixtures dropped sharply. One match saw tickets available for under $100 on the secondary market, a figure that tells you something significant about demand relative to supply. Across the 16 host cities, the scale of unsold inventory was visible in real time. Tracking tools used to monitor official resale platforms identified well over 250,000 tickets available for resale as the tournament got underway. The prices for some matches had fallen so dramatically that analysts were describing the market as being in free fall for a period, with some supporters reportedly sitting on the sidelines waiting for prices to drop further before committing. Then something unusual happened. Tens of thousands of tickets that had been visible on the governing body's own platform simply disappeared from public view in the days immediately before the tournament. The total dropped rapidly, from around 70,000 available through official channels to under 30,000 in a short space of time. FIFA said this was part of their process, that tickets would continue to be available throughout the tournament as part of a last-minute sales phase. Analysts and observers were less certain, with some suggesting the sudden removal of visible inventory was an attempt to manage the perception of demand rather than its reality. The governing body declined to comment specifically on why the figures had changed so abruptly. Into this situation stepped 2 state attorneys general, and their arrival changed the character of the story entirely. The attorneys general of New York and New Jersey jointly announced they had subpoenaed FIFA, demanding internal documents and information about the governing body's ticketing practices, specifically for matches at the stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey, where 8 fixtures, including the final, are scheduled. The language they used was not diplomatic. One described FIFA as having created a gauntlet of confusion, fake scarcity, and impossibly high prices. The other said simply that being honest about ticket sales is not complicated, but that FIFA had turned it into the opposite. Their investigation focuses on several specific allegations: that fans may have been misled about the location of the seats they were purchasing, that FIFA changed the seat map at the stadium after tickets had already been sold, creating new zones and reassigning supporters to less desirable locations, in some cases seats far from the field or behind the goals, that the use of dynamic pricing, introduced for the first time in World Cup history at this tournament, and the release of tickets in phases had artificially pushed prices upward, with the average cost across the three main ticket categories rising by around 34% between October and April, and that face value tickets were still available for 86 of the 104 matches, even as FIFA's president was telling the world that demand was equivalent to 1,000 years of World Cups at once. The Attorney General of California had already written to FIFA separately, seeking answers about whether the state's consumer protection laws had been violated during the sales process. Three state-level legal authorities in one of the world's most litigious jurisdictions, all pursuing the same governing body, all citing the same set of concerns about transparency and fairness. That is not routine institutional pressure. That is a legal environment that FIFA will need to navigate carefully during a tournament it is simultaneously trying to present as a celebration of the sport. FIFA's president had told the world ahead of the tournament that there were 500 million ticket requests. That demand was, in his framing, absolutely extraordinary. Those numbers may be accurate. Requests and purchases are different things, and the volume of initial interest was clearly large, but the distance between 500 million requests and a resale market with prices in freefall, hotels reporting floors of empty rooms, and state attorneys general issuing subpoenas is significant enough to warrant genuine examination. The hotel situation had already told part of this story before the legal actions began. A comprehensive survey of hotel operators across the American host cities found that 80% reported bookings tracking below their initial forecasts. Several operators in cities including Boston, Philadelphia, and Seattle described the tournament in private terms as a non-event. That phrase, used by people who had invested significantly in preparation on the basis of official projections, is a verdict that no amount of promotional language easily counters. Part of the explanation for that shortfall lies in who has not come: the international supporters, the traveling fans who follow their national teams across multiple tournaments, who book early, who spend significantly, who create the atmosphere that makes a World Cup feel like a World Cup, have not arrived in the numbers anticipated. Aviation data confirmed that bookings from Europe to American host cities for the tournament period were down substantially year on year. Supporters from several participating nations faced travel restrictions that made attendance in the United States effectively impossible, regardless of whether they held tickets. Fans from Senegal and Ivory Coast, two nations whose football communities have genuine World Cup followings, were subject to travel restrictions that barred most of their supporters from entering the country. A Senegalese supporter at a tournament in Morocco earlier this year captured the sentiment precisely. He said he didn't understand why the host country would want teams from certain nations to qualify and then make it impossible for their supporters to follow them. The cumulative effect of all of this, the visa barriers, the pricing, the travel warnings from prominent voices including a former FIFA president and a respected legal scholar, the anxiety around immigration enforcement at tournament venues has been a meaningful reduction in the international footprint that was supposed to define this World Cup. The initial projection from official sources was for as many as 10 million visitors to travel to the United States for the tournament. The evidence from hotel bookings, aviation data, and resale markets suggests the reality will fall considerably short of that.
This is not without precedent. Major sporting events routinely generate economic projections that exceed what is ultimately delivered. A study from one of the world's leading universities found that the 3 Summer Olympic Games preceding the most recent edition exceeded their budgets by an average of 185%. The gap between aspiration and reality in major sporting events is structural, not incidental. Experts in sports economics have pointed out for years that the promised windfalls from hosting these events are consistently overstated, that the excitement of the bid process creates a political and institutional incentive to present the best-case scenario as the likely one. But there is a difference between an economic windfall that underperforms its projections and a fan attendance story that raises questions about the character of the event itself. Because the World Cup is not primarily an economic intervention, it is a football tournament. And the football tournament derives its power, its capacity to produce the moments that people remember for the rest of their lives, from the atmosphere that supporters create inside and around the venues. When those supporters don't come, or can't come, or were priced out before they had a chance to decide for themselves, something changes that money alone cannot measure. There is a warning in what happened at the Club World Cup last summer. That tournament, staged in the United States as a direct precursor to this one, drew attention for something that should have prompted serious reflection among those planning the larger event. Stadiums that were expected to generate atmosphere instead produced images that circulated widely. Vast areas of empty seating, matches between major club sides playing to crowds well below capacity. In Atlanta, one match between a prominent European club and a local side drew fewer than 25,000 people to a stadium holding more than 70,000. In Orlando, one fixture attracted fewer than 4,000 paying supporters. Those images were a warning. The pricing model that had driven away supporters from the smaller tournament was the same model being applied to the larger one. The logistical barriers that had deterred international travel for the rehearsal remained in place for the main event. The institutional lessons were available. The question of whether they were acted upon is one this tournament is now answering in real time. FIFA's president claimed 500 million ticket requests and said demand was like 104 Super Bowls. State attorneys general described a gauntlet of confusion and fake scarcity. Both things cannot be entirely true, and the evidence from the resale markets, the hotel surveys, the aviation data, and the legal proceedings suggests that the more sober assessment is closer to the reality than the promotional one. What remains genuinely uncertain is how much this matters once the football itself takes over. Because the football does take over. It always does. The moments that define a World Cup, the unexpected goal, the tournament's revelation, the match that no one could have predicted, are not diminished by empty seats elsewhere in the draw. When the players of real quality perform at this level, the game asserts itself in ways that override the institutional noise around it. That has been true at every World Cup. It will be true here. But here is the question worth sitting with. When the tournament is over, when the trophy has been lifted and the analysis begins, will the story of 2026 be told primarily as a football triumph, or will it be told as a moment when the gap between what football's governing body promises and what it delivers to the supporters who love the game became too wide to close with words? That question is being asked by attorneys general, by hotel operators, by fans who couldn't afford tickets or couldn't get visas, and by the ordinary supporters who looked at the cost of attending a World Cup in 2026 and made the calculation that they would watch from home. I'd genuinely be interested in your view on this. You've followed enough football to know what a World Cup atmosphere is supposed to feel like. Does what's happening here feel like a tournament that is finding its level, or does it feel like something more significant, a moment when the institution of the World Cup began to lose the trust of the people it exists to serve? If you found this worth your time, a like helps more than you'd think. Subscribe if you enjoy thoughtful football coverage, and let me know your view in the comments. I read every one. The greatest football tournament on earth belongs to those who love the game. Whether the people running it still understand that is the question 2026 is quietly, and not so quietly, forcing everyone to answer.